Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for a Willowdale Chapel online teaching this week. My name is Jordan Lichty, and I'm the student pastor at our Jennersville campus. You can usually find me hanging out with middle school and high school students, having the time of my life. But I'm so excited to have the awesome opportunity today to dive into some scripture together. Let's look at God's Word, and I'm excited, no matter where you're joining us from, to dive into this together with you. We're currently going through 1 Timothy in a teaching series that we've taken to calling Gospel-Shaped Leaders. As believers, we're all shaped by the gospel, and each of us is given an incredible mission to impact others with the good news of Christ. At Willowdale Chapel, we believe that because of this, every believer is a gospel-shaped leader, not just pastors, CEOs, or elders, but everyone who believes in Christ and follows his word. We've been going through this teaching series, and we've explored all the ways that the gospel does indeed shape each of us to lead. Last week, we talked about how gospel-shaped leaders are lifetime learners. And today, we're going to discover how, if there's anything that a lifetime learner needs to know, it's the fact that gospel-shaped leaders need to learn how to respect and honor others. In today's portion of Paul's letter, we're going to see he basically writes R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Timothy, find out what it means to me. Because we're diving into one of Paul's greatest hits, 1 Timothy 5, 1 through 16, that talks a lot about R-E-S-P-E-C-T and how we can show proper care to those around us. Now, before we dive in, I've got to tell you, today's text is a bit of a doozy. There's a lot going on in the passage, but we are going to explore together the beauty of these 16 verses because there's a lot going on and we don't want to miss it. Today, we're going to see not only how to respect and honor others well, but why it matters so very much. This isn't just a laundry list for Timothy, but it is a recipe for how to have Christian community with the care of God. So let's see our passage today. 1 Timothy 5, 1 to 16. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and young women as sisters with absolute purity. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents. For this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she's over 60, has been faithful to her husband, and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all sorts of good deeds. As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list, for when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. And not only do they become idlers, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. So, I counsel younger widows to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have in fact already turned away to follow Satan. If any woman is a believer and has widows in her care, she should continue to help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so like I said, on the surface, there's a lot going on in these 16 verses. We can easily skim over or skip this passage because we don't know what to do with it and miss its meaning completely. It seems confusing. It's all over the place. Perhaps you don't know how to interpret it. and it makes you feel weird and stressed out, like you just read a piece of modern art. What is happening? But the picture Paul is painting for us gets clearer and clearer the deeper we dive. He writes Timothy and he tells him that there's a proper way and a wrong way to care for others in the church. And Tim, I'm going to tell you about it. Kent Hughes, a biblical commentator, compares our text today to playing chess. He says, Timothy, you need to know you're going to be thrown into all sorts of different situations where proper care is needed. You stand on the checkered streets of Ephesus with daunting figures looming all around you. You see, there were bishops clashing, pawns fighting, and people trying to avoid confrontation. But Paul reaches out to young, timid Timothy with the tummy issues, a fellow gospel-shaped leader. And he tells him that I want to set you up to make the right moves. In these 16 verses, Paul explains that gospel-shaped leaders care for others properly. And no matter what the situation you find yourself in, the right move to make is always showing respect and honor to the people that you lead in a way that shows respect and honor to the God we serve. It's true. You'll see that as a common theme in today's passage. Paul goes on to cover 3 main themes and situations that Timothy might find himself in on those very same checkered streets of Ephesus. So today, let's take a deeper dive into our passage to see how we too, as gospel-shaped leaders, can respect and honor others well. In the first section of this text, Paul says in verse 1, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your own father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Now, Paul wants Timothy to understand that he's going to bump shoulders with a lot of people, and all of them need the proper respect and honor. And that means there's different ways to approach each situation. Now, if you're like, Jordan, everyone deserves respect and honor? Yeah. But Jordan, I know a fair amount of knuckleheads. Well, I'm sorry. So did Timothy. But we're going to see how he distributed respect and honor in appropriate ways to all those around him. A commentator once said, people are like doors. Some are easy to deal with. Some are simply difficult. Some are old and mysterious, and some are new and cause a racket. There are also those who are broken, and there will always be, at the end of the day, those who simply won't budge. So how do we approach these interactions with so many people that are all so different? How do we go about distributing proper respect and honor in such a wide variety of interactions? Well, Paul starts by telling us to throw around some family language. He throws it around himself. Father, mother, sister, brother, right? You see, the first thing he wants Timothy to know is that gospel-shaped leaders, man, in the church, they respect and honor others by treating them like family. Respect and honor others by treating them like family. There are no lone wolf believers. Every gospel-shaped leader functions as a part of the family of Christ. In the church, we are all brothers and sisters, young and old. You and me, we're blood. And he tells us what that ought to look like. He begins by giving Timothy advice on how to treat older men. He says, don't rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as a father. You see, when we interact with those who are elder, respect is a big deal. I say that as a young gospel-shaped leader myself. Our elders know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two, just like a State Farm commercial. I know that in today's culture, the mantra is that respect is earned. But in contrast, Paul tells us that when dealing with those who are elder than us, respect is due. In all our interactions, even when correcting, we need to approach them with all due respect. Now, no, this does not mean that you can throw the phrase with all due respect before an insult and it counts, right? Saying with all due respect, you're an idiot doesn't work. You can't do it. I don't want to hear it. Why? Because in the passage, Paul tells us that we are not to rebuke harshly. In fact, the original translation of the word means we are not to strike at others harshly with our words when we rebuke. Instead, we should correct and exhort older men in the church as you would a father. Now, I don't care if you're on good terms with your dad or not, but when we correct or rebuke an older man, we should exhort him like a father. Now, what does that even mean? Now, oddly enough, this is very interesting. The word used for exhort here in the text, the Greek is parakaleo. Now, what this term is the same term that is used to reference how the Holy Spirit interacts with us. You see, parakaleo means to counsel, to comfort, to console, encourage, urge, and appeal. When we correct with parakaleo, you counsel, you comfort, and you encourage someone gently in the way they should go. Paul tells Timothy to treat other guys with respect who are older by treating them like fathers and correcting them gently with counsel and encouragement in all we do. We then see he goes on to say that we should treat younger guys in the church like brothers. Now, no, this doesn't mean that you can run around picking on each other, right? I don't want to see you run around church punching dudes and hashing out wet willies. That's not what it means. I don't want to see it. And don't even get me started on the wedgies. None of it. That's not what it means to be a brother in Christ. And the same way that there is respect and care due to our elders, there is respect and care due to our juniors, to those who are younger. When it comes to younger men, they're our brothers, right? We don't tear them down. We build them up. They're family. There's this thing in our day and age where people like to take shots at millennials and Gen Z. Let's be honest. It's a thing. It's a thing for people to talk bad about or put down or mock younger generations, to talk about their work ethic, communication style, or initiative, or lack thereof, right? It's a thing. It's a thing. But let me tell you, are they not the future of the church? Who wants to hurt their own future? They have such promise. There's this thing with teens that they feel like adults don't want anything to do with them. And adults typically think teens don't want anything to do with them either. And so they usually avoid each other, and it's sad because we need each other and we're better together. We don't want to create a divide and a void in the family of Christ because we have misconceptions about one another. You see, Gen Z is powerful. They have significance and potential. Gen Z has the power to change things. Let me tell you, Gen Z has the power to raise things from the dead. They do. They single-handedly raised Crocs from the dead. And the Crocs should have stayed in the grave. But they raised them back from the dead. And not only that, but Crocs with socks. It's true. It's a look. It's everywhere. I'm telling you. They have the power to change things. And yeah, you might see a young dude at church rocking Crocs and socks. But don't overlook how he's serving and learning and growing in the ways of God. Don't undervalue his future in the church because of his age. That's our brother. Yeah, you can make fun of his fashion, but don't put down or diminish his passions. Those younger guys, they're our brothers. We don't tear them down. We build them up, and we show them value in the family of Christ. Now, yeah, we treat older men as fathers. Of course, we treat younger men as brothers. And now Paul explains that with older women, we treat them as mothers. Now, ladies, that doesn't mean that if you don't like my message today, you can send me in my room, because I live far away and that's taking this passage out of context. But what it does mean is when it comes to older women in the church, we care for them as much as we do our own mom. Now treat them with the same care, dignity, and love as you would your own mother. If a woman is older than you in the church, show them respect. Let them know how much you appreciate all they do by showing them care. If they bake you something, eat it. If they write you a letter, thank them. If they've got something to say, give them the time of day. Hear them out. With older women, respect and honor them as you would your own mother, by showing them you appreciate and care for all that they do in the family of Christ. We wouldn't be much without them, and we're definitely thankful for them. Now, last but not least, we see in the text in this first section that Paul explains that when it comes to younger women, we should treat them as sisters in all purity. Paul tells Timothy that as a gospel-shaped leader, you treat younger women and girls with purity like they're your own sis. There are too many examples today of young church leaders who get themselves into scandals and into troubles and dishonor their ministry because they didn't take this advice to heart. As gospel-shaped leaders, we need to understand that there is a proper way to respect and honor others, not just by how we treat them, but also by how we conduct ourselves. It's true. We treat each other like family, which means we see younger women as sisters. Why? Because how we look at women with our eyes is going to determine how we treat them with our lives. It's true. I have a sister, and I'm protective, and I'm fond of her in the proper way. And the same is true for us as a church. We should protect and care for younger women in the church in a proper way, and by doing so with all purity. As we talk about respecting and honoring others, we need to realize that as gospel-shaped leaders, we do this first and foremost by treating others like family. This means that we value everyone in a way that's not harsh or impure, because this is what shows respect and honor to others in a way that gives respect and honor to God. We see in the text today that Paul then continues by telling us that, you should indeed treat each other like family. But in verses 3 through 8, Paul highlights that we should also respect and honor others by not overlooking their needs. You see, Paul writes to Timothy to help him navigate not just his interactions with people, but how to approach their needs properly. Paul writes to Timothy to help him understand by using a specific people group as an example, widows, right? In verse 3, it reads, "Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, this should learn, first of all, to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and repaying the debts of their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions, so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Okay, this is a juicy passage. What is going on? Let's start off by talking about widows. Widows are like war heroes. They're people who have seen loved ones pass in their arms, and yet have stood tall and kept walking up the hill faithfully. If there's a group of people that is deserving of respect and honor, it's widows. And that's why Paul uses them as an example to Timothy. You see, in ancient culture, men got married typically much older in their 30s, and women got married younger in their early teens. That's yucky, I know, but it's true. And in this ancient culture, men worked and women didn't. And so a woman's whole survival and livelihood depended on her husband and his income. So with a lower life expectancy and no modern medicine, this meant that a lot of the younger wives outlived their older husbands. And this meant that it made for a lot of widows. Whether due to war, sickness, infection, or simply falling off a donkey the wrong way, if your husband died and you became a widow with no income, what did you do? In Ephesus, they had a lot of widows and only limited church funds. So Paul tells Timothy that when it comes to widows, don't ignore those who really are in need. Keep an eye out for the real ones. Real recognize real, Timothy. You need to scope out those who have real needs. Now, what does this even mean? Aren't they all widows? Don't they all have needs? No one's husband is more dead than the other. Well, yes, they are all truly widows, but not all widows are without options. A commentator by the name of Alistair Begg explained it this way: Timothy, she's a widow in need if she's a widow indeed. Meaning, help those who need it most. Help the widows who have no one else. You see, in the Jewish Greco-Roman world, you supported and cared for widows in your immediate family. It's what you did. It's simply what you did. If a widow had kids, they took care of her. If a widow had family, they supported you. Even pagans took care of their own widowed mom. That's why in verse 8, Paul says, if you don't even take care of your own relatives, you're worse than an unbeliever. Because even they do that. Even they do that. Now you might read something like this and maybe you take it a number of ways, right? There's a lot of ways to interpret this. Perhaps husbands, some of you are thinking, okay, Jordan, we get it. Fine. We'll take out a life insurance policy before we go parasailing on summer vacation, okay? Just in case. Maybe some of you are feeling convicted. Like, man, I really need to build that in-law suite. Or maybe perhaps some of you are saying, Jordan, you don't understand. When Grandpa died, we put Nana in a senior care home. I don't want to brag. They don't have bingo 4 times a week. They have it 5. And there's a pool. Now listen. In this passage, all that Paul is saying is that it honors God when you care for your parents and grandparents, widowed or otherwise. Because let's be honest, if our Christianity doesn't work at home, it doesn't work at all. Now, what Paul is teaching Timothy is that when it comes to respect and honor for others, you not only treat them like family, but you don't overlook their real needs either. You see, the church in Ephesus had a problem. Timothy had to scout out and sort the real needs from the fake ones. Who had real needs, who didn't. In Ephesus, there were relatives who weren't taking care of their own widows. They thought, the church will handle it. Besides, I'm saving up for a Tesla, or more accurately, a handsome camel. They've got it. And people started taking advantage of the church's charity and pawning off the care of widows to the church itself. And it meant that there wasn't enough to go around for those who needed it most. For those widows who had no kids, who had no family, who had no social security, there was nothing for them. They needed real help. See, people started abusing the system. It's like those little take a penny, leave a penny things that you see on gas station countertops. You know the ones I'm talking about? They were meant to be thoughtful, but they became a way for kids just to quickly run out of the store giggling with a fistful of 28 pennies. Woo! Free money! Don't abuse the system. You see, Paul's saying we need to respect and honor others well. And we can't do that if we're ignoring genuine needs because people want handouts. And that's usually a harsh term, but what he's saying is, in this context, we want to be diligent to meet real needs. And we can't do that if we're caring for everybody in ways that they shouldn't be cared for. The church is in the business of providing godsends, not handouts, because we don't want to overlook the needs of those who need it most. We simply don't. We don't want to disrespect or dishonor real need because of bad stewardship. As gospel-shaped leaders, we want to make sure that those on the assistance roster really need to be there. So like Paul, when we're giving proper recognition to those with genuine need, we're doing something that honors God. We don't want to leave anyone out because of bad practice. You see, gospel-shaped leaders, They respect and honor others by not overlooking their needs. This means we take responsibility to provide for those around us. And we do this by giving God sense, not handouts, so others receive respect and honor for real problems in a way that shows respect and honor to God. You see, then Paul finishes his letter in the next section by telling Timothy that no, not only do you show others respect and honor when you treat them like family or refuse to overlook their needs, but last and certainly not least, you show respect and honor by being conscious caregivers. Conscious caregivers. You see, Paul instructs Timothy that it is one thing to acknowledge somebody's needs, but it's something different entirely to meet those needs in a helpful way. So what does it mean to show care to others in a way where you're conscious of the situation? Well, let's take a deeper dive to find out. In verses 9 to 10, Paul writes, "Now Timothy, no widow may be put on the list of widows unless she's over 60. She's been faithful to her husband and is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds." Okay, so let's clear something up. In verse 9, Paul makes a remark about not supporting widows unless they're 60 or older. Does this mean that if your husband dies at 53, man, hang in there, sweetheart, we'll get to you in 7 years, okay? Just hold out, hold tight. No. Every situation calls for common sense. And we'll unpack this shortly, but 60 was typically the age back then where remarriage was unlikely, and that's important to the actual scenario he's getting at. But one of the first things that Paul also addresses in verses 9 through 10 is all about giving church care, not just to those who are needy, but to those who are godly. At the beginning of this last section, Paul basically says, and he tells Timothy, where the church funds go, godliness should flow, right? Honestly, when we look at this, we're probably going to be honest and not support a widow or anyone who is mean, flicking their cigarettes at children, or cussing out the deacons. If we did, something would seem a bit off. That seems odd to us. You see, what Paul is saying is there might be a widow in need who is a widow indeed, but isn't following God in the slightest. A life lesson that Paul gives to Timothy is this, that a church supports financially what it condones spiritually. Truthfully, because to those around us, where we put our money, it shows our motives. As gospel-shaped leaders, we need to be very careful of that. Who we support shows what we support. The causes, the people, and the situations that get God's own money should reflect God's own character. We've got to be conscious caregivers because we don't want to accidentally fund or support something that gives people the wrong idea of the church or the God we serve. Yeah, how we care should reflect well on the God we serve. And in verses 11 to 16, Paul goes on to explain that the care we show should reflect well on the people we're helping too. See, not only should it reflect well on the God we serve, but it should reflect well on the people we're helping. Let's be honest. Have you ever had somebody do something for you, but they did it in such a way you kind of wish they never did it at all? Now, I'm guilty of this. And husbands, I don't know if you can relate. I might get myself into trouble. But man, when I do the dishes at home, I declare it. I announce it, baby, right? Hun, hear ye, hear ye. I am now commencing with the dishes out of a servant's heart. Babe, I just want you to know I'm not only loading them, I'm scrubbing them too, right? Yeah, I just want to serve you like how Christ serves the church. I'm committed to this, I'm really putting in the work, It's probably going to take me a while. My back already hurts, but it's a price I'm willing to pay. Well, let's be honest. My wife gets sick of that. Like, can you just do it out of the kindness of your heart? How we care matters. There are right ways and wrong ways to care for people. And if we're honest, there are even times when helping hurts. Paul unpacks this in verses 11 to 16, and he writes, "As for younger widows, do not put them on such a list. For when their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry, lest they bring judgment on themselves, because they've broken their first pledge. Besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. Not only do they become idlers, but busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not. So I counsel younger widows to marry, have children, and manage their homes, and to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some, in fact, already have turned away and followed Satan. If any woman who is a believer has widows in her family, she should help them and not let the church be burdened by them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need." Okay, so I'd like to first point out that verse 16 at the end of the passage is simply reiterating our last point that we talked about, that if you're related to a widow, you should care for them. Yes, even if you're a woman, you too, right? I just wanted to touch on that before we dive into the rest of the passage. Now, on the surface, verses 11 through 15 seem a bit odd. I wanted to better understand what Paul was getting at in this text, so I drove in to a bunch of commentaries. I dove into them and I researched them, and when we put what's happening in context, it makes a lot of sense, and it's actually pretty thoughtful. You see, in context, in Ephesus, there was something going down. There was a unique practice in the church of Ephesus during this time where some widows were taking a pledge of singleness and service to the church in exchange for a financial living stipend. But what was happening is it appears that young widows who would pursue this vow of singleness and ministry would have two outcomes, right? Two things would occur. Either one, they would receive support from the church and run out of things to do. And so in their free time, they'd start running around town and gossiping, slandering others, and stirring up trouble, which is something the church shouldn't support because, like we just talked about, it's hurtful to the God they served. Or two, they were taking the pledge of singleness and later discovering that they were suppressing their true desires to be remarried. And they'd be overcome with their desires and want to marry again. Remember, women married young. You could easily be a widow at 19 or 20. And with the best of intentions, they made a pledge, but they had strong desires. You see, the problem that Paul is talking about is that any available Christian bachelors would have been loathed, shamed, and hated for causing a widow to break her pledge to the church. And so most of the new husbands that these young widows broke their church pledges for were non-believers because they had no connection to the early church and they didn't care about her host. She was cute and that's all that mattered to them. And in this culture, the wife typically adopted the religion of her husband. And so many of those young widowed women in Ephesus took a pledge they couldn't keep because they had good intentions but strong desires. And they not only broke their vows, but they adopted the pagan religion of their new husbands because the Christian bachelors didn't want the formerly Christian widows to break their vows to God. See, this dynamic was something the church couldn't support because it was hurtful to people that they were helping. When put into context, what Paul is telling Timothy is that these verses tell us that young widows shouldn't be supported by the church. They should get married to Christian bachelors who can provide for them because we don't want to help in a way that hurts. Anytime gospel-shaped leaders act as caregivers, we must be conscious to ask two very important questions. Is this care hurtful to the people that we're helping? And is this care hurtful to the God we're serving? It's got to be both. It's got to be both. It can't be one or the other. See, in today's passage, Paul gives Timothy a bunch of raw ingredients for how to respect and honor others well on the checkered streets of Ephesus. And as fellow-shaped leaders, we too can respect and honor those that we lead in a way that shows respect and honor to the God we serve. How? By treating others like family in a way that shows everyone value that's not harsh or impure. By not overlooking others' needs and taking responsibility for those around us as we give God sends, not handouts. And by being conscious caregivers who are helpful, not hurtful, as we support financially what God condones spiritually in a way that is mindful of Christ and dignifying of others. Honestly, when I was given this text, I didn't know what to make of it. I thought it was a laundry list of convoluted regulations, but slowly I discovered it was a step-by-step map revealing God's heart to his people. See, the beauty of these 16 verses, when it gets put into perspective, is that you realize that respecting and honoring others simply ensures that we care for one another properly. And it means that as we care for each other, others will see a God who cares for them. And maybe, just maybe, they'll come to care about our God too. And as gospel-shaped leaders, that's all we could ever want.
Thanks for checking out our online teaching. If you enjoyed this content and would like some more information about us, head over to our website at www.willowdalechapel.org or download our app. There you can stay up to date on any events, ministries, and other opportunities we have coming up at Willowdale Chapel.